问一，加尔文从凡我所吩咐的事这一句，首先要教导什么？ Question 1. What does Calvin first intend to teach from the phrase, everything that I command? 答，他要指出，只有神在自己话语中明确是合法的敬拜，凡是没有神话语见证的侍奉，都不被允许。He intends to point out that only worship explicitly approved by God in His own word is legitimate worship. Any service that lacks the testimony of God's word is not permitted. 问二，为什么加尔文说顺服是敬虔的母亲？ Question 2. Why does Calvin say that obedience is the mother of piety? 因为真正的敬虔不是出于人的热心、创意或感觉，而是从顺服神的命令而生。一切离开顺服的敬拜，看似虔诚，实际上都是空壳。Answer. Because true piety does not arise from human zeal, creativity, or feeling, but is born out of obedience to God's commands. All worship that departs from obedience may appear devout, but in reality is hollow. 问三，他为什么说不照这个做的敬拜是荒谬且带着迷信？ Question 3. Why does he say that worship not governed by this standard is absurd and tinged with superstition? 答，因为一旦敬拜不是由神的话引导，就一定会被人的想象、文化与迷信产生的根源。Answer. Because once worship is no longer guided by God's word, it will inevitably be governed by human imagination, culture, and emotion, which is precisely the root from which superstition arises. 问四，这段注释如何连接到第一条诫命？ Question 4. How does this commentary connect to the first commandment? 答，加尔文指出，要遵守第一条诫命，人必须借着神的话认识真神，并且以信心接受这样的认识。离开话语的神，不是真神。Answer points out that to truly keep the first commandment, a person know the true God through God's word, and receive that knowledge by faith. A God detached from God's word is not the true God. 问五，神为什么严禁增添或删减他所吩咐的事？ Question 5. Why does God strictly forbid adding to or taking away from what he has commanded? 答，因为这样做等于人的想法可以补足神的命令。加尔文之言，凡是出于人自己想象而明的敬拜形式，都是不合法的。Answer. Because doing so amounts to declaring that human ideas can supplement God's commands. Calvin states plainly that any form of worship invented from human imagination is illegitimate. 问六，加尔文为何说这样的人是在为自己制造假神？ Question 6. Why does Calvin say that such people are making false gods for themselves? 答，因为当人不照神所规定的方式敬拜时，实际上敬拜的已经不是启示中的神，而是照自己标准塑造出来的神。Answer. Because when people do not worship according to the manner God has prescribed, what they are actually worshiping is no longer the God of revelation, but a God shaped according to their own standards. 问 T. 以赛亚书 29-13 节在里扮演什么角色？ Question 7. What role does Isaiah 29:13 play here? 答，这节经文证明神严厉审判那种用了精灵的敬拜，并且宣告要使这神的智慧归于无有。Answer. This verse demonstrates that God severely judges worship that replaces God's commands with human commandments, and declares that he will bring such people's wisdom to nothing. 问八，加尔文最后为什么提到教皇制度的敬拜？ Question 8. Why does Calvin finally mention the worship of the papal system? 因为在他看来，那是一个以人的制度与堆积而成的敬拜体系，结果正好应验了神所宣告的审判，属灵的愚昧。Answer. Because in his view, it is a system of worship built up from human institutions and rituals, and its outcome precisely fulfills the judgment God has pronounced, spiritual foolishness and blindness. 总结问，这整段注释的核心警告是什么？ Question. What is the central warning of this entire commentary? 答，离开神话语的敬拜，不是比较自由的敬拜，不是以多一点热心，而是已经换了对象。Worship that departs from God's word is not a freer form of worship, but a corrupted one. It is not greater zeal, but a change of object.